Generosity New York is a group of Christians spurring on one another to experience philanthropy differently. With more joy, more wisdom, and doing it in community, which is rare. We deliver events, content, and counsel. Events that are inspirational, educational, and safe. Not meant for solicitation. This is meant for learning and being inspired around your own generosity.
Thanks, Jeff and Tim and Kristen and the team at Generosity, and pleasure to be here with everybody. It's great to see other business leaders on the call here. I think it's an important time for all of us to collectively meet and communicate and share ideas, and just a little bit about my experience in times of crisis. As Jeff mentioned, I did have an office 4 blocks from Ground Zero, and that was definitely a time when I think I saw New York at its best. In the response, it really did bring community and people together in ways that I had never seen before in New York, and many people that also had lived there. And it was interesting because we couldn't go to our offices at all. Obviously, there was a radius around Ground Zero where you couldn't even enter. So they would set up these sort of gathering centers, and a lot of people would just show up to volunteer their time. It was really incredible what came out of that. So I was doing commercial real estate at the time. I was helping people get temporary office space. There was consultants from helping people with their numbers or getting loans. It was really neat to see the collaboration that came out of that. And actually from our office, you could actually still see the smoke, and we finally even got back in there. It was amazing. We could see the wreckage of Ground Zero. One of our offices looked down into the belly of Ground Zero. So fast forward to now, and when I went back 5 or 6 weeks, and I found myself as the epidemic worsened in that sort of self-protective mode and thinking about family and gathering water and making sure we had enough stockpile of groceries and everything. And God kind of really put it on my heart to kind of hit the pause button and say, wait a minute, it's great you're protecting yourself. What can you do to help others? And I'm not saying this to sound like the Christian do-gooder or anything, but it was really something that I'd been also through the downturn 2008 right there in the city. I was 3 blocks from Lehman Brothers and that meltdown. So I realized I did have some possible wisdom and expertise from my backgrounds. Certainly not a crisis of this magnitude, but something that I definitely felt really pulled to try to help other, especially small business leaders and owners, through this crisis. And ask, on the pre-call, it really hit me. I think it was you, Jeff, that said, the balance between the practical and the Pollyannish, which really spoke to me, because I think there is the practical. We have businesses we need to run. We're wondering how we can sustain employees and what are the right moves to make in the face of the ever-changing information that we're getting, trying to sort out the fact from the fiction, from just the day-to-day survival and caring about others within our organization. So on that note, I think I will turn it over for a political perspective to Congresswoman Miller. It's a pleasure to have you on the call and to talk about, maybe some things that from your experience and expertise, things you're seeing in DC, and ways we can all, from politicians to business owners, be generous in the times of a crisis like this. So I'll turn it over to you, Congresswoman.
I want to thank you all for having me here today. My family is also business owners. Our sons are right now dealing with 300 employees, making sure that they are healthy, making sure that they are economically sound. And, it's a concern. As a mother, grandmother, business owner, I not only manage real estate and bison, but I've been doing this for 30 odd years since I first managed departments. And so I understand. I've already had texts this morning of things that I need to deal with at home. On a congressional level, and in my time in life, I think it's so important to have balance. And I think you said it well, because you use your faith as your base and your life experiences and your knowledge to make the right decisions. We first became aware of this in January. By January 15th, we finally had gotten from China the makeup of the virus, and by the 16th, we were already working on it to try to see how to solve the problem. We've passed a couple different bills. I don't want to talk you to death because I'm sure you all have watched enough TV and been online enough to know all the various things that we've done. But, we started with the $8 billion in emergency funding to work on testing and the vaccine. We started working on paid leave and tax credits for small business, and very important in my particular area, and I'm sure in New York you could open my eyes, but telehealth services. Being in a rural state, it is going to become more and more important. The phase 3 that we passed hung in the Senate for a while because there was a little bit of politics being played, which I honestly feel at this time in a crisis, those things need to fall away. And so we did get some of the things out of the package that did not need to be there, and there's still a few things that are in there that shame on them for doing. But the important thing is working on paycheck protection, all the different stimulus that we're trying to do to keep our economic heads above water, because we were in such great shape as a country economically before this hit, and all of a sudden when they're talking about millions of people out of business, and again, as a business owner, I understand all the different components that we're dealing with. So we've got the small businesses, which in my state is over 90% of what makes us tick. But we're trying to do so many different things with the benefits, the money that is available for insurance, and getting to the banks, and we're implementing that right now. And it kind of reminds me of the mercury we played with in high school. It's very fluid at this point, and I think within the next couple of days things will be a little bit more cohesive as to how the banks are going to handle this, where the problems are, and how we move forward. But people, of course, need to contact their SBA, contact their banks, and make sure that every I is dotted and every T is crossed so that they qualify to get the money for the cash flow that they need. I'd really like to hear from you all some of your issues, some of the focus that that I need to know as a Congresswoman, that I can take back and talk to the Small Business Committee and talk to financial services, and so that we make sure that as we move forward, there will be little things that need to be tweaked or revisited. Personally, I don't want to see another package happen until we have this cash infusion and we know how we're moving forward. This is uncharted territory that we're going through, and as a fiscal conservative, I want to make sure that the unintended consequences are dealt with instead of just keep throwing money. We need to have the proper focus, which will come to us through you all. As soon as we realized there were problems, I contacted the superintendents of our schools. I also had a call with the health providers, and I also had a call with senior centers, because we have a very large senior population like Florida, and a lot of them depend upon these senior centers to be fed. And so I reached out to them immediately to let them know, don't panic. And whatever you do, don't panic, because panic makes you do the wrong things. And, if we keep a level head and we move forward, taking data and science and working all of these glitches out, each week this moves forward. We're seeing more and more ingenuity coming into place. We're the American people have moved forward. The faith-based businesses, they all reach out to each other. It's really, I, of course, was alive during 9/11, but I was in West Virginia, not in New York City. And so what you saw, I can only relate to a little bit because of our opioid epidemic and how we've had to come together as a state to solve those types of issues. But I would really like to hear from you all, because you're only as smart as all the people you know. And so I'd like to turn this back to you all to talk to me and tell me what you want to hear or what we need to know moving forward.
Well, why don't we are doing pretty well on time right now. While people are thinking about some questions, I can kick it off, Congresswoman. In talking to a lot of business owners, one of the concerns is that even with the fiscal stimulus coming out of Washington, and it sounds good on, as far as the numbers go, or it sounds that there's going to be some money available, but one concern is that the recourse, the repayment terms, it's not always to a lot of business owners realistic as they project out. For example, here in Connecticut, there's talk of, and this is a state level, so not to do with federal, but they were going to be giving short-term loans for up to $75,000, but a 1-year repayment, which for a lot of people doesn't seem. And on top of that, there's recourse, meaning there has to be personal guarantees and collateral. So increasing the burden on a lot of business owners. Now, we're not expecting anything for free necessarily, but I'm hearing more and more people just concerned with the practicality of the packages and when they actually reach the business owners. So could you speak with that a little bit? Do you see that there's a sensitivity, I guess, around the ability for especially small businesses to repay, especially if there's zero? We're not talking about a decrease in business of 30-40%, which would be catastrophic in itself, but down to zero for many of us.
That's correct. I mean, even dealing with the airlines, and I think they're 92% of their business is gone right now. It is catastrophic. I'm hearing questions about the SBA. I'm hearing questions about when it becomes a grant as opposed to a loan, and all of those types of issues. I've also heard some concern about, can the banks handle this? And, that is the unknown at this point. So as far as each state and how they handle it, that's what you need to bring back to us and to your Congress people, where you're finding out that you're having problems. Because we have 2-year loans, we have caps on salaries, we have businesses qualifying for paycheck protection, and they're trying to make their web pages as simple as possible so that the businesses can access what they need. But they kept stressing to us, contact your banks, contact your lenders. So I don't know if that necessarily answers your question. I have a couple members of my staff on this call too. So if you all hear anything that you think we need to pipe in, help yourself.
Congresswoman, thank you. Hey folks, it's Matthew, the Congresswoman's chief of staff. She was probably up at about 4:30 this morning working, and at some point between that and the call, a quick update on the Treasury guidance on this is early this morning, the Treasury released its second guidance in about 36 hours. So we're all kind of in the red zone right now on the lending. This is the fastest the government has ever in the history of the world, moved this amount of money. So Treasury released 2 sets of guidance in the last 24 hours. And all of your lenders should be, and if they're presently not, which may take another day or two, all of your current lenders, if not now, again, in the next 1 to 2 business days, are going to have all the information they need to process applications as quickly as possible to be able to get folks money. And then they'll be able to work with you on the different guidances in terms of what's forgivable. I think that the biggest thing right now that folks in Congress worked on is getting money into everybody's hands fast to be able to maintain those payrolls. and then 6 months, 10 months, 12 months from now, making sure that folks aren't then being overburdened. So if you've got a loan and you're hitting a 12-month repayment cycle and you can't hit it, and you're still starting back up, to be able to work with folks to do that. But anybody who heard from their bank 2 days ago and didn't get good news or didn't have information, today, tomorrow, Monday or Tuesday, they'll have the information they need to get everything processed to get people money fast. And then the guidance so people can get the forgivable loans as opposed to loans for other work. So definitely work directly with your lenders. They're going to have all those complicated details. Thank you.
And I believe they're saying within 3 weeks, the money should be there.
Great. Congresswoman, we have a couple of questions coming in from the chat. From Gian, a lot of employers rely on 1099 workers instead of W-2s. And from what they have, seems the packages are just for employers that have W-2 employees. Do you know if the stimulus has helped for those small businesses that mainly rely on 1099 workers? Yeah, that's a pertinent question I also see coming up in my discussions, that a lot of us rely on independent contractors, contract labor, as opposed to W-2 employees. And so what is the...
And the answer to that is yes, they can apply themselves.
The 1099 workers can apply themselves as opposed to...
Independent contractors, all of those people can apply themselves.
Correct. And as of last night, the businesses, if this is anybody who had an application, and businesses can also include 1099 contractors. So if you're an independent contractor, you can apply for the enhanced unemployment. And if you are a business who works with them independent contractors, you can now include them in your application.
Oh, that's great to know. That is, I think, encouraging for a lot of us that rely on 1099s. Another question from Mike is, what about the post-crisis consequences for participation? The audit burdens, the clawbacks, obligations induced by participation from future bills. Can you speak to that, Congresswoman?
Well, I know that they will revisit within a year, and I think you have 3 years. Is that correct, Matthew? Is that the final number?
Correct. And yeah, correct.
Yes.
And the guidance is that, you know, at the 6 and 12 month mark, we're probably going to be revisiting to make sure that nobody is burdened and that this is as soft of a landing as possible.
That's why I'm saying it's so fluid, because it's almost, it's being created as we speak. It's an ongoing process right now even with the treasurer. You know, I was on phone calls with leadership yesterday, and I knew that was forthcoming, and bam, sometime while I was probably walking my dog this morning, out there it was. Most of these things are fluid. So it sounds like a non-answer, but they will continue to make it more finite as we move forward. And as a business owner, I know that's extremely difficult, because the one thing you want is continuity, and you want to know the rules so you can follow the rules. And so it's awkward for you.
Congressman, we have one more question coming from David Park. The regulations from last night said 75% of the PPP loan has to be used for payroll. This works great for businesses that are staying open and staffed, but it doesn't work for businesses that are essentially closed. They're not allowed to be open, or there are no customers to justify staffing. Yeah, I think that's a good point. Wouldn't mind speaking to that.
It is a very good point. Matthew, do you have anything late on that? Because
Right.
I've just dealt with the 75% and the 25% and what is forgivable.
Right. The zigzag on this, and again, this is a lot of zigzagging. So because the guidance was also just updated for the folks who closed and were furloughed. So, and work with your lender, again, specifically, I'm sorry to keep repeating that, but if you had closed a business and furloughed employees, then you can rehire those employees, keep them on payroll, and use that loan to use that loan to basically cover them. It's basically in place of unemployment insurance. The the way we looked at it is, well, you're going to, if you're going to get paid, if you're going to have the unemployment insurance payout, basically instead of paying that way, move it to the businesses. That way those businesses can then keep their people on payroll. That way you can keep the business there. That way, even if you are closed right now, if you have zero business, zero revenue, zero activity, if you can keep your people on payroll with this money, then you might be able to open up in 7, 10, 14, 21 days, as opposed to 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, things like that. So the idea being for this program, that 75% to cover your suspended situation, as opposed to just having those people go get unemployment insurance. So it's it's not as close to break even on the financial side, but that way you're ready to go. So, and there are programs, if you've already closed your business and furloughed folks, you have the ability to rehire them and then activate this program so that you can keep them that way.
Correct.
You just have to work with your lender.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for the explanation, Matthew. And finally, Congressman, just one more, kind of shifted a little bit towards the generosity part of this. Where do you see generosity manifesting itself right now on Capitol Hill? Have you seen signs of that? Any examples that you've seen?
I'm not really sure. Are you talking about specifics? Are you talking about dollar amount? Are you talking about relationships between people or businesses reaching out?
Sort of all the above, really, whether it's generosity of people's time. I know certainly you guys are probably working overtime. Could be, private money, could be, just people collectively getting together to support one another. Any kind of manifestations of generosity that you might be noticing down there in Capitol Hill.
Well, I'll have to turn that one over to Matthew too, because I'm at home and he is in DC. And when I talked to him last night, he was out buying pizza down the street in the Navy Yard. So as far as, in times of crisis is when we come together as a people, and the reaching across the aisle at this point is much stronger. It was so tenuous over the last 15 months that this, we have to be regrounded, and sometimes it takes a kick in the teeth to make that happen. So as far as politically, I see people working together. We're all isolated in our own little places, but we're reaching out, we're having calls, we're doing those things. But at the end of the day, when we come back the end of April, I'm very hopeful that the sheep's clothing come off, or the wolf's, whatever, however you would describe it, that people realize why we're really there. Because that's what's been the biggest problem for me since becoming a Congresswoman is I think people tend to forget in Washington, D.C., what we're really supposed to be doing there. But Matthew, tell me about what the gravitas, whatever you're seeing in D.C.
No, I think it's kind of the opposite. This is where, I'm going to, as they would say in West Virginia, I'm going to brag on Congresswoman Miller a little bit here. She sometimes forgets the work that she's doing, that how it connects backwards. And I'll let her tell you another story when we're done about how she's probably a disconnected politician. She doesn't look at it that way. But one of the things that we've all been doing from business and generosity perspective is the collection of the masks, the personal protective equipment, and the number of hours that her and our whole team have spent on the phone. Tom, who helped organize this call, was on standby to fly to India at a moment's notice to go pick up a million masks. We've got every business in the world, helping sort of try to bring these masks in from around the world. And in about an hour, she's going to be hopping on a phone. She's going to be hopping on a phone call with Battelle, based in Columbus, the company that has now can clean 80,000 masks a day, to help coordinate their response to get masks clean. So I think that, the response to get those masks in, and everybody generously giving their masks to the hospitals and the first responders and solving that problem, that's probably been the biggest thing that we've seen from our side, because, everyone left, everyone's off Capitol Hill right now, and that's in their communities, and that's really what we're seeing.
Yeah, not
Well,
much.
we did. You're right. I'm sorry. I was just going to say we did get several volunteers from the Corps of Engineers to help at the food bank. I mean, we are doing those kinds of things. I don't talk like that. But yes, we did. We are working on helping each other.
Well, it's great to hear these kind of stories, because I'm sure we can all agree that a lot of the stories we're seeing out of the press kind of can focus on the negative and sensational. So to hear these kind of examples of generosity, and I'm sure there's many more out there that we're not aware of because they just don't get reported. So,
Well, even my church, who, the women who knit prayer shawls are now all making masks. So if those are the little stories you want, they are out there. You're correct.
Yeah, well, quick Christian plug, because I actually, through a business venture I'm involved with, it's a medical and wellness center in New York that we're building right now. And we actually recently just looked at the church's response to other crises and epidemics, going back to the plagues of the Roman Empire through the Black Plagues. And Christians really were at the forefront of the response. They were the ones that were on the front lines, risking, sacrificing. It's been really fascinating to see that. So again, those aren't the stories that was on the headlines, right, Congresswoman?
Yes, and I think the television shows are starting to put a little bit more of that forward, because for 2 weeks they've done nothing but tell us everything that is wrong. And American people, Christian people, we all step forward to help however we can. And it's those little acts of kindness that I've always just done and not told people about. That's my job, just you always do unto others as you would have others do unto you. And so if you have an 85-year-old next door neighbor, of course you check on them every day. You make sure that they need help, or do they need groceries. To me, that's normal behavior. But absolutely, it's people of faith who have stepped forward since, as you say, the Black Plague. Yeah.
Well, Congresswoman, thanks a lot. We're going to have to turn it over here to keep everyone here, be mindful of the time. So thank you so much for your time. If you're able to stay on to take some questions, that would be phenomenal. We understand you probably have some serious time constraints, but if you can stay with us, we would be honored. And I'm just going to turn it over now to Mike Sharrow, who has been introduced, but I just have to say, in this week, learning and understanding more about what he does and his mission, which is, to equip business leaders to build great businesses for a greater purpose, I think is phenomenal. It really speaks to my heart as a business leader. So I will turn it over to Mr. Mike Sharrow.
Thanks, everybody. This has been a fun conversation to eavesdrop in, and an honor to get to contribute some perspective. So maybe picking up from where Congresswoman so eloquently speaking to, it's the best of times, the worst of times. Perspective I'll speak from is we get the privilege of getting to serve a pretty broad swath of companies, about 1,600 U.S. businesses, and then a little over 100 businesses in Asia and South America. And obviously the last few weeks, while it's been shell-shocking for everybody, the implications and severity varies by city, by country, by industry. But a highly non-scientific poll, as we've checked in with all these groups, we essentially got hundreds and hundreds of CEO peer advisory groups in all these markets. The initial reports, and this is all based on, do we spend 1 more month or 2 more months or 3 more months in various stages of shelter at home kind of scenarios, but about 25% are facing catastrophic harm to their business. Can we actually reboot or restart after this? About 50% in this is going to be a big blow, but we will be okay. And about 25% are actually having the best years in history. So if you're in the medical device space or distribution space or online marketing or online distribution, there's a number of spaces either pre-existing or pivoted and reapplied that are having blowout months or having blowout weeks. I was talking to a couple of telemedicine companies that are having 1,500% growth per week right now. So best and worst of times. What I'd like to do maybe in the few minutes we have is say universally, everyone's kind of coming out of the shock stage of we just got slapped by a tsunami to realizing we got to strategize, because whenever this hurricane subsides, the reality is, unlike a normal hurricane, it's not just going to be storm cleanup. The world's altered. Like, it's altering our marketplace. So the business landscape will look different besides the damage and reparations we've got to do. And so certainly as people of faith, this has been a shaking time. We've been using that language the last few weeks that Hebrews talks about, things that shake us, but we're part of an unshakable kingdom. So when things rattle, it begins to both test and reveal things. So we've all had the operational fitness of our businesses tested, whether it's cash reserves and what our debt structures were and how good our risk planning was prior to this crisis. We've all had our cultures tested, our team's ability to rally and be a community in this. And we've all had our faith tested. What do we actually place our security in? What do we actually believe? Do we actually believe this is our business or God's business, our people or God's people, that we're our provider or he's our provider? So there's some pretty foundational tests going on for us as a nation, for us as a community of believers, and us in the business space. We're also at the point where people are pivoting. So there has to be the question of, how do I leverage the capacity I have? And we've been citing the language, a sociologist, anthropologist said last year that the sky is not falling, but the earth is shifting. So it's not the end of the world, but the world is going to be different. And so we have to begin asking how we're going to stand up in the new world. And we're not going back. So hopefully more people have realized that we're going to wake up Monday and go back to how things were in December. April, May, June, July are going to look very different than any time we've been in before. And so let's help create those stories and get okay with the fact we're probably not going to have certainty about when it's going to be better for a while. So we have to have clarity of how to lean into uncertainty and be agile and dynamic in that. And in the spirit of generosity, some things we're seeing that have really encouraged me are entrepreneurs applying the same creativity that makes us successful in business to be innovative in these crisis times. And so I'll walk through a couple of very different ones, from individual plays to collective plays. One, meeting with a number of entrepreneurs who are taking personal cash reserves that they either had in the business or privately, and realizing that there are some wildly distressed stocks and debt vehicles out there that we all know are sensationally depressed. And they're saying, you know what, I'm going to put $500,000, I'm going to put $1 million into these very distressed, stable stocks. And in 9 months, when those things have rebounded, I'm going to liquidate those and fund the most critical social agencies in my community that are going to be hurting for funds. And so I'm going to do a strategic asset play and run it through a donor advised fund or whatever they may do at the end of that. Just got an email yesterday, a bunch of business owners in Dallas were looking at two problems: the healthcare system buckling and healthcare workers dealing with coronavirus volume, and then restaurants going out of business and low-wage employees being furloughed who can't afford to be furloughed. And so they said, can we compound our dollars? And so they pooled, created an impact fund and said, let's raise money to buy meals for healthcare workers that we're going to get delivered, and got restaurants to agree, okay, what's your cost of operation? How do we keep your people employed? Let's build a 15% tip in for the waitresses and waiters, and made it to where it's for every $10 you get to buy a meal for a nurse or a doctor in the public hospitals, and you're keeping 3 people employed in a restaurant. And so they quickly rallied and are looking that they may be able to save hundreds of employees' jobs without government assistance, actually, through their collective channeling of funds. So I think some community programs like that are fascinating. I'm talking this afternoon to a chain of furniture stores that realize the fabric they keep for fabrication repairs is actually the same grade to make masks. And so they pivoted their furniture supply chain to become a mask provider to local community hospitals. I was just talking to some restaurants in Raleigh where businesses tanked, but they pivoted together and became the provider of meals for at-risk children in the local low-income school districts. And again, how do I just keep costs covered, keep my people employed, and how do we make some good in this? We may not make much money, but can we make good happen? And they are. And so I think what we do in a crisis reveals a lot about what we believe. One of my passions for working in the space of business is, I would say, it's easy to be a Christian on Sunday. It's easy to have good theology in Sunday school formats and small groups, but your real theology, our real faith, is evidenced in how we navigate hiring, firing, lawsuits, and business decisions on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And certainly right now more than ever, when, it's one thing to say, I'm blessed and I love God, and be bold and be generous to your people when you have a high net worth and lots of liquidity. In fact, some of the people hearing that are going, sure, it's easy for you to say I'm #blessed when you've got that life. But when the world is changing and about your portfolio you don't want to look at anymore and you're bleeding cash, are you still blessed? Do we still say, blessed be the name of the Lord, he gives and takes away? Do we still act with love and care for people, realizing God's not promised us that our businesses or our net worth will be preserved for the next 5 years? And we all know that one day this will all be different, but what we do with people and the decisions we make and who we choose to be in this, that will matter forever. And so I think this is a powerful moment. As Greg mentioned earlier, the church has actually most been present, has showed up, and has been undeniably compelling to the world in crisis, because it's when you've got nothing to gain and everything to lose, and you still choose to love and be generous, that people know, okay, this is not elective. This isn't just because it makes you feel good. That's got to come from something. And I hope as entrepreneurs, particularly in markets like New York, that this becomes a chance to make the gospel beautiful and relevant, and that the creativity that we've been so good at, making widgets and making money, we can figure out how to pivot, create scale, create the jobs that our country's going to need 6 months from now, and realize that there's no amount of stimulus that Congresswoman Miller or others can provide that are going to solve the long-term strategy that we're going to have to innovate. And so I'm encouraged by what I'm hearing, and also believe we're in for a marathon here. And so we got to figure out how to not hold our breath and be generous creators in the midst of this storm.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. And to just follow up from your word, innovate. Heard Congresswoman say, with all the fluidity right now, you're going to see those stories of innovation. The necessity is the mother of invention, right? Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of different ways that can manifest. One of the things we want to do with this call and is build community, and we're going to stay on afterwards for people to ask more questions, get to know one another. But Mike, in your unique position to be interfacing with so many faith-based business leaders, are you seeing communities sort of develop out of this? Are you seeing that ability to sort of find that balance to where there's the need and the want to protect businesses, which is understandable, as well as reach out and support one another, and just that collective brain power, prayer, support that can come out of a community of business leaders. And lastly, I just want to say, Mike, that do you see also, because I've noticed this in my past with myself and others, that we have a hard time as business leaders sometimes with asking for assistance, with asking for help. That can hold us back when we really need it. And I'd like to just encourage everybody that is feeling like they're really in a pinch, that things are a little more despondent, that there is a community out there. They exist, and we would like to gather around and help how we can.
Yeah, great questions, Greg. Romans 8:28 says God works all things to good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose, right? So we know that this is included in those all things. And some of the early deposits of that, I think, are this tearing down of the hyper-individualism. Our country is perhaps becoming toxically individualistic, and the gospel certainly screams the interdependence God creates. Both of us are dependent upon him and are designed for interdependence in one another. And we sometimes do that electively. And this certainly has pushed people to the table. And so we're seeing even the thousands of leaders we have who are in monthly peer groups, they're suddenly realizing it's not enough just to come to a once a month roundtable. Like, I need to be connecting more frequently. And so many are doing weekly calls and daily calls, and they're both doing, hey, I need to hear some good news today. What's working? I need to share what's not working. And even in teams then realizing this is a chance to go back and be more human. And so if, in fact, I was just talking to a telemedicine health tech company yesterday, and their head of sales, who's not a believer, we were talking to the management team, and we said, what's something that the CEO who is a Christian could do? And the head of sales, who's a total tech guy, went, I feel like our CEO has always been a little, I could tell he's a little uncomfortable and worried about sharing his faith with us. And while I don't want him to push his faith on me, I think in times like this, we would like to hear a little bit more about how is he dealing with fear and what is his hope? And so I wish he'd actually open up with us a little bit more, because now more than ever, we need to talk about these things. And so I think there is a beautiful chance to reset and to realize the power of community, the power of being known and having a circle that you can both share what's winning, what's not, and be less worried about impressing everyone that you had all the right ideas, and be more focused on what are we accomplishing together. And so I am seeing that in everything from Brazil, and I was talking to our leaders in Singapore and Kuala Lumpur last night. Same thing. They're saying we are more communally connected than ever, and are sharing things and celebrating things at a level we never did before. And so I hope we seize that moment. And my hope is actually that doesn't become a crisis survival thing only, but what if we were to be this collaborative and this communal around our calling, our identity, and what we need to do in the world when it doesn't feel like the sky is falling like that.
Yeah, Mike, thanks for emphasizing that, especially around the sharing of our faith as business leaders, and recognizing that opportunity. One might say, a lot of people, atheist or agnostic, may be in a, where is God during all this? But at the same time, people are going to be saying, where is God? I'm curious now. I need some help. I've looked other places. It's not working. So I'm seeing more and more of those conversations happening more naturally, more organically. So I think it is a great reminder for us, as believers and business leaders out there, to engage in those discussions without feeling, maybe it's going to be a little less awkward now for some of us.
Yeah, even in like we have an entrepreneur I'm a huge fan of, and he just had to lay off 70% of his employees. He was in the food service space, and he hopes he can hire them back as quickly as possible. But even in that, as he tearfully shared with his employees his love for them, his what grieved him in this, and his belief that God loves them more than he does, and he for this season was the conduit of God's provision, and he personally hopes he gets to be that again, but that he believes God's plans for them are better than his, and his own processing of that was powerfully received. And people who didn't respond to his gospel, flag waving at times when everything was good, were going, wow, if you can claim that when you're making tough, tragic decisions, there's an authenticity and power to it. So yeah, I think I hope we look back and see this being an anvil which God is kind of forging a whole new galvanized type of Christian entrepreneur community that perhaps sparks the awakenings in communities and countries our world so needs in this next year. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that, Mike. Does anyone have any questions for Mike here? We're trying to keep it on time, so we're going to wrap in just a couple minutes here, but I want to open it up for any questions. Yeah, Tim says C12 has also made their resources related to COVID and Christ available to all leaders, not just members.
Yeah, about a month ago we started getting deluged with questions. We realized we had to play offense, not defense, and so for right now, I hope we don't do this very long, but we felt one of our callings to serve the community at large, businesses around the world who we may never see again, is if you go to c12group.com/blog. Essentially, the only blogs we're putting out right now is a weekly thing every Thursday. That's an executive briefing around tools, strategies, regulations, success stories. And it's all free downloads, no paywalls, no email collection. Literally, it's just grab those tools around how to lead in this time. And so each Thursday, we're putting out the best practices we're seeing, the latest changes, and suggestions around how we can do this well. And it's being used by corporations all around the world. So that is grab it, use it, share it. We're getting emails from companies I've never heard of saying, hey, our executive team's meeting once a week and it's processing through this. This is informing our strategic planning, which is now, a 7 to 30 day window instead of a 1 to 4 year window as before. And so grab those resources, share them with anybody you want right now.
Mike, do you have a website you could give us for that?
Yeah, if you go to c12group.com/blog, that's where we're housing all those things right now. So c12group.com/blog, you'll see this series of COVID-19 executive briefings. And we are aggregating many of the stories I shared with you this morning, others, tools you can download today. And as the Congresswoman said, the reality of federal programs and state programs is fairly fluid. So we are trying to keep that up to date each week as that world changes.
Okay. The website is posted in the chat, everybody. One last question before we close from David. Mike, what is the criteria to join C12, and what are the top 3 things that people receive from being a member?
Sure, great. We uniquely serve business owners, CEOs, entrepreneurs who are running growth stage businesses. So that means you've actually got staff, you get $1 million more in revenue, you've got 5 to 10 employees at least and above, because we're really focused on how you work on your business versus in your business, and how do you grow that thing. And as you said before, it's about great business for a greater purpose. The 3 areas of win is really, and this part of what got me in as a member 10 years ago, is how do you build a great business? And so business performance, business success, business growth in all dimensions, economic and team, but then also business as ministry. So how do you have a business that's creating eternal significance and impact today beyond money? It's total life generosity, total business generosity. And then the third part that is so critical, and everyone on this call can understand this season, is a life in order. So it's transformation of our marriages and life, and making sure we're experiencing the shalom in the life that God calls for us, in the middle of trying to change the world and run businesses. So it's business success, eternal significance, and personal life wholeness. And those are all 3 pretty elusive in seasons like this.
Well, seems worthwhile to look into. Guys, I'm just going to close us in prayer, then turn it over to Jeff for a wrap up. So let's take a minute here. Lord Father, we just thank you for this gathering of business leaders and politicians. Lord, we ask that you just walk with us in front of us, Lord, that you can be our guide during these trying times, these fluid times, these innovative times, Lord, that we would not rely so much on our own knowledge, but on your wisdom and guidance, Lord, that we would have a spirit of humility, a spirit of generosity, Lord, the courage to step up and do things in the face of adversity that we may not otherwise do. Lord, we just pray that we could really be shining lights for a world out there, Lord, that needs to see it. And Lord, on this call, with all the business leaders out there and the resources and the expertise and the shared experiences, Lord, we just hope that you really anoint each one of them and give them the tools that they need to navigate, not just in the workplace, Lord, but also at home. There's a balancing act, Lord, and we are seeing the stress from some people of just the cabin fever phenomenon, Lord, and that we would all have that extra fruit of the Spirit called patience, and when needed, Lord, but just really guide us and give us that extra wisdom. Fill us with your Spirit, Lord, and we pray all this in the name of Jesus.